It says it can hold 32 cans, but let's see about that. Now this feature stands out above all the rest. It's not necessarily a deal breaker, but is it really 30% lighter than a Yeti? I do a couple of these things. Let's talk about the build quality on this cooler for a minute. Leaking the first time I try it, that's a bad sign. I guess time will tell if it's really that tough. It says this cooler will hold ice for 3.5 days, but does it really? Here is what this cooler is not. I bought the cheapest cooler at Costco that's not a piece of junk. Or at least I hope it's not. I paid $59.99 for this 24-quart Coho cooler at my local Costco in March of 2024. And as the kids say these days, it's giving Yeti. Translation for my fellow uncool compatriots, that means it looks and feels a lot like a Yeti cooler. But is it as good as a Yeti Roadie 24 or one of those other fancy roto-molded coolers that cost enough to be put in your will? Let's go fishing and find out. All right, so I made it here to the pond where I'm gonna try my hand at a little fishing today. I got a simple lunch in here, just packed a soda and a sandwich and an apple, and I'll get to that here in a bit. But let's start by going over some of the key specs and features of this particular cooler. Now here I got the tag that came right off it. So here's some basics for you. It's a 24-quart cooler, that's 22.7 liters. It measures 15.5 this way, 19 this way, and then it's just over 17 inches tall. It says 17.2. I didn't measure that exactly. I can tell you in my Ford F-150, it fits under that tonneau cover just fine. But if you got a shallower bed, like I know some Honda Ridgeline guys or something like that have asked about that, I'm not quite sure if it'll fit under there. Now it doesn't list the weight on there, but I did weigh it on my scale at home and it came out at 13 pounds. And that's important because one thing they do say is that it is up to 30% lighter than most other competitive coolers. Read Yeti. However, the Yeti Roadie 24 only weighs 13.1 pounds according to the specs on their website. So it's about the same. Just take note that it's not going to be 30% lighter than every other cooler out there. However, if you look at like the Arctic 20-quart roto-molded cooler, that has a slightly smaller capacity but weighs almost 16 pounds. The Orca 20-liter cooler weighs 18 pounds and their 26-liter cooler weighs 25 pounds. So there are some out there that are significantly heavier. It says it can hold 32 cans, but let's see about that. I'm going to take my lunch out for a minute. Let's get the ice out because obviously that spec does not include ice. And let's start putting in some cans. 24, 25, 32. Hey, they weren't lying. Can I get another? That's 33. That's 34. Oh, indeed. You do that, you're gonna risk bursting some open. All right, 32 on the dot. They weren't joshing around. Let's get that ice back in there. Well, so they were truthful on that spec. It does indeed hold 32 cans, although you put one more and it's just a little too high, you're gonna end up exploding sodas in there if you do. With 32 cans, you're barely gonna get any ice though, so they gotta be real cold going in to make it useful, and you could still get a little bit of crushed ice around inside, but barely. Now this feature stands out above all the rest. Actually, it really doesn't. This is a freezer style gasket. And that is a very good thing to have on a cooler. It helps keep it airtight. It won't necessarily be watertight, although I'll get to that in a minute. But what it does is it keeps the cold air in and the warm air out, and it does help keep your stuff cooled longer. I am glad to see though that for 60 bucks, you're getting that kind of a thing in a cooler. Some other features it has built into the design, it does have padlock holes on either sides. It has a little indentation on the side here for a strap to go over it, just to keep a tie down strap in place if you want to tie this thing down to your pickup or something. On the side here, it does have a double drain plug. That can be a handy feature, although I don't know that it's entirely necessary on a cooler of this size. In fact, a lot of 20-quart coolers don't even have a drain plug because you're likely going to just dump it out the top if you need to drain it. But that is a nicer drain plug that you see on a lot of high-end coolers. When I bought it at Costco, I also bought a bag of ice, and I put it straight in there and I brought it home and I set it on my workbench in my garage. The next morning I came out and there was a big puddle underneath it. So as ice started to melt, it was draining. I realized this was a little loose, so I tightened it down and I thought I had it resolved. Well, the next day I saw another puddle, smaller, But what I discovered is I really had to crank tight on that drain plug. It is that male style that sticks out so that you can attach a garden hose. A lot of people like that if you're going to use it on a fishing boat or something like that. It helps drain the water off the boat. There's other uses for it. If you like that feature, this has it. These kind that have the threaded part that sticks out, I've had a cooler before where it got banged up on stuff, those threads were ruined, and then it leaked forever. I couldn't ever get it to seal again. So I don't love that, but it's still a nice plug and a lot of people prefer it. So just a note on that. Costco did have this listed on their website, and on there it said it has a fish ruler. It does not. There is no ruler on the lid of this cooler to measure how big your fish is, which is probably a good thing because I don't expect to catch any whoppers today. I like to look at the cooler and see how stable it is. It's on level ground-ish. How much you gotta go to tip it? That can get a pretty good rock going. There, I got it over. Yeah, all right, gives you an idea. All right, let's go try to catch some fish. A note about portability. So this cooler has about 20 pounds of ice in it, and it's not too hard to carry. I mean, here, I do a couple of these things. 20 pounds of ice, plus the cooler itself, you're about 32, 33 pounds, plus I got a little lunch in there. So this one's probably less than 35 pounds, and it's comfortable to carry. If you look, even that handle, if you hold it against your leg, it kind of bends in and it makes it all right. It's not too bad. Now, if this were fully loaded at max capacity, it might be pushing 50 pounds. And even then, I think it's okay compared to some of the alternatives. Most of your weight's gonna come from ice and whatever you put in it. The cooler itself isn't too bad. I think most people could carry this one around just fine. All right, if I'm gonna catch some fish, I guess I need a fishing rod. We're fishing, let's see how well you can stand on this little cooler. Feels all right. I'd stand on that. I'm hungry and it's lunchtime, let's eat. So there are a few things I like to look at when I'm looking at the quality of a cooler, and the first one is just kind of the fit and finish. It's what you see and feel. And so when you look closely, a lot of plastic coolers I've seen will have really rough edges, especially along here. And that is especially apparent in rotomolded coolers because when they come out of the mold, they have these rough edges, just little plastic bits that were sandwiched between the mold. And so then someone has to manually go through and use a razor blade to scrape those off. Injection molding is different. Since this is injection molded, you don't see those rough edges and it's pretty clean. I can feel a little bit of a gap there, like, you know, you can feel that line across the two pieces that are squeezed together. However, nothing feels super rough. Overall, it feels pretty darn good. I wouldn't say anything looks or feels super cheap. So just in terms of the fit and finish, I think this one passes the test. Now I'm gonna practice a little trick that I learned to use a flashlight to see how consistent the insulation is inside the cooler shell. So this is a little trick I learned when I did the Cordova Coolers factory tour. The guy was really cool to show me through that. You ought to go check out that video if you haven't. I'll try to put a link below or maybe in the card above. But basically, you kind of use a flashlight, you press it right up against it. It works especially well on light colored coolers. And what you're looking for is basically a big ring. If you see just a little small ring of light like we are now, that means that the insulation, the foam insulation that they inject inside of these shells is pretty even throughout. If you see a big gap, a big halo of that yellow color like we see just right around it, then we'd know, oh, bingo, there's a problem. Let's look at the front side where it's flat. It looks pretty good to me, I'm not concerned. But this handle here is a stainless steel handle. It does feel solid. It doesn't feel like it's real cheap or thin metal. I'd be a little bit more concerned about these plastic attachments on the side. I think that is more likely to fail than the handle itself, just by being banged on something or hit on something. This foam piece here is just, it's pretty basic, pretty simple. It doesn't feel like high-end or fancy or anything, and it does twist on you. Not a big deal. I just wouldn't expect that to last more than probably a couple of years before it's gone. And then because I am who I am, I probably just put duct tape around it for some grip. The bottle opener is stainless steel and it feels sufficient. It's not attached to the bottom. There's a little lip there. These latches are okay. This plastic part does feel a little thin to me, like that could be a potential failure point. That pin inside may or may not be a problem, who knows. This rubber part feels standard, you know, like any of these other coolers that have a nice rubber piece. And I'm glad they kind of went with the hybrid. Some of them are all plastic and they get really rigid, and I feel like those are more prone to failure than this one, where you've got this, you know, a little bit of give there, a little bit of stretch, but here and here you've got the rigid plastic that latches down nicely. If we flip it upside down, you can see these feet, these anti-skid feet. That's kind of a plasticky, rubbery material, more plastic than rubber, I'd say. But it does the trick at keeping it from skidding. Here they've got a plug, but that's probably where they injected the foam inside. In fact, I'm curious about the insulation down here. It looks pretty good. This was leaking the first time I tried it, and I thought that was a bad sign. Basically, the issue was that the drain plug wasn't cranked down tight enough. When I was addressing the whole leakage issue, I flipped it over on the side, and that gave me the chance to evaluate whether or not it was leaking from the lid. And it's pretty darn good. Overall, the leaking isn't a major concern to me, to be honest. I think, yeah, it was a little bit of a bummer. It wasn't perfect. But on the lid side, this freezer gasket, I think, is doing a pretty good job. In fact, you can see all that water beaded up right there and along here, where it actually kept it in. Most coolers I've tried, that is good for keeping it pretty airtight, but not necessarily keeping it watertight. I don't know if I'd call this fully watertight. I think if you really shook it around and got it sloshing, you'd have some leaking out from under the lid, but not much. And that's a good thing if it tips over in the back of your SUV. Now, as far as durability goes, I guess time will tell if it's really that tough. I haven't done any crazy torture tests or dragged it around with a UTV like I did that other one. Nothing like that. But it looks and feels good. It looks and feels tough, and it feels like it fits the category of coolers that it's trying to be in. And again, for 60 bucks, you know, that is a quarter of the price of some of the competitors in this space. And I think even if it's not quite as durable as some of those others, you know, it's hard to complain about the value you're getting for what you're paying. It says this cooler will hold ice for 3.5 days, but does it really? They say, you know, if they fill this thing up entirely full, it can hold 45 pounds of ice. I don't believe that. I think it's probably closer to 30 or a little less. When I first got this, I put a 20-pound bag of ice in it and it was almost full. So I don't think you're gonna get to 45 pounds of ice alone. But that 3.5 days that they advertise, they say it's at 86 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 degrees Celsius. When they said 30 pounds of ice and 15 pounds of food, they said to expect 2.5 days in those conditions. And if you got half and half, basically, then expect only 1 day of ice retention. Honestly, in my experience, that seems to be pretty realistic. What I know so far with this one is that I bought this on Monday. It is now Thursday afternoon. It's been 3 full days, right? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. No, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah, no, 3 full days. It has been 3 full days and there's still plenty of ice in there. Some is melted. You saw some water drain out, but it's not bad, and it would still go, I think, in these conditions for probably 2 or 3 more days, I would guess, at least. But it hasn't been hot. It is is it even spring yet? It's March. At the time I'm filming this, it's early March in Idaho. We happen to have a beautiful sunny day today. This has been sitting in my garage where it's about 50 degrees, maybe 55 degrees. And then today it's out in the sunshine and 60-degree weather. But you know, that kind of gives you an indication. It's been cool and this has lasted a long time. I think if it were hot, I wouldn't be surprised if it made it to that 2 or 3 day mark pretty easily, and maybe even beyond. But I also think that is fitting for this type of cooler. You know, when you get into this size of cooler, you're not really looking for something that can hold food for a week. Usually you're looking for drinks for the day, or lunch, or fish for a day or two. I think 2 or 3 days and this size of a cooler is excellent, actually, and fits the need that you're gonna use it for. If it goes well beyond that, then you're probably looking at a bigger cooler anyway. So it's important to kind of consider the capacity versus the days of ice retention that you expect. Here is what this cooler is not compared to the Yeti Roadie 24. First of all, this is not a roto-molded cooler. Rotational molding is a different process than injection molding. They both have their pros and cons, but they're also both known to be highly durable, and it is a step above in quality and durability compared to a blow-molded cooler, which is what you'll find in most of your cheap coolers. So while it's not roto-molded, the fact that this is injection molded under $100, let alone $60, is a fantastic deal in my opinion. Rotational plastic molding, or the process by which those big coolers like Yetis and Arctics and Orcas and others are made, is a process where plastic resin is put into a mold. That mold is then rotated in a big oven while it's heated up. That plastic starts to melt and it forms around the walls of the mold. So in the end, you get a lid that is only one single piece, and then the body of the cooler that is a solid piece. So there's no seams. In theory, that can make it very durable, but it has some disadvantages, a rotational molding does, that roto-molded coolers may be more susceptible to being damaged or warped from high heat, whereas injection molding takes place at a higher temperature. The polyethylene or the plastic resins that are used are created to withstand higher temperatures, so it might be less susceptible to damage from sun. I don't know that for sure though, so don't just take my word on it. Look it up if you're really interested in learning more about it. Injection molding often yields or can yield thinner plastic shells compared to rotational molding, and so that might make it a little bit less durable or more easily broken or brittle. However, this is brand new to me. That hasn't been my experience with this or other injection molded coolers I've used to date. But because it's not one solid piece, that is why you have this white here and the gray here. Those are two separate pieces of plastic that are fitted together. Another thing though that this cooler is not is IGBC bear resistant certified. So Yeti coolers typically go through a process, and many other brands too, where they send them off to some place in Montana or Wyoming and they fill them up and they put them in a pen with grizzly bears for an hour to see if they can survive. And if they do, then they get that stamp of approval. And some of us are willing to pay extra for that. And in some places you're required to have that. In a lot of national parks, state forests, national forests out west, that's becoming more and more required to have that approval as a food container. This does not have that officially. It might withstand it just as well, especially if you put padlocks on there. I think it's very similar to a lot of designs that are approved. Just means they didn't go through the hassle or pay the money to get it IGBC bear resistant certified. So the Yeti Roadie 24 sells for $250. This sells for $60 at Costco. I did see it online for $70, although it was out of stock. Still, you're paying less than a quarter the price for this. And that, my friends, is where I think you have a hard argument to make to say the Yeti is really worth that much more. I know a lot of people love Yeti. I like their products too, but man, it is hard to justify that price when you can get something that does just as good of a job for a quarter of the price. Now, I haven't tested the Yeti Roadie 24 for ice retention, but I have tested the Yeti Roadie 48, and it was the best in class for that size of cooler. It kind of surprised me because they're bigger, older school Tundra coolers were not the best performing in their category, but that Roadie 48 wiped out all the other 40 to 50 quart coolers that I had by a long shot. You can check out the results of that in this 38 cooler ice challenge I did a while back. Yeti offers a 5-year warranty on their coolers, whereas Coho offers a 3-year warranty on this. 3 years isn't as good as 5 years, but honestly, there's a lot of nice coolers out there that only offer a 1-year warranty or even less. Arctic is one of those that only gives you a 1-year warranty, which is definitely subpar for the category. Now, 3 years isn't bad, and again, you're only paying a quarter the price of what you are for a Yeti. However, I do question somewhat the customer service on Coho. I tried to call them or contact them by email, I think it was, about a year ago when I did an outreach to a bunch of different cooler companies just to see what their customer service experience was like. Just asked a question. I never got a response from Coho. So I'm not sure you're gonna have a great luck going directly to them. They have a very kind of minimalistic and obscure website. I think they mostly just work through their big retail partners. Thankfully though, in the case of Costco, you're pretty much guaranteed to get taken care of. I've always had great experience with their customer service, returning things that were faulty or problematic or that I just didn't like, even after using them for a long time. I don't think you're gonna run into an issue, so for that reason, I wouldn't be too worried about the customer service you'd get for one of these coolers. Well, I'm a sucker for Costco deals. That's why I couldn't help but buy this thing and do this video about it. A cooler like this from Costco is probably a good bet. And if you don't like it, you can always take it back, right? What do you think about this cooler? Let me know in the comments if it's something you'd buy or not. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see me test and try out too. One thing I'm starting to do is an email newsletter. So if you want to kind of get an inside scoop or see some behind the scenes or see some of the data or my screenshots of my massive spreadsheets and even just some stories and kind of a roundup of the best kind of content we're trying to create at Outdoor Empire, sign up for our email newsletter. I'll put a link in the description below. All right, let's go catch some fish. Gear up and get outside.